Welcome to BeBelle podcast. I am super excited for you to listen to this episode. I tell the story at the beginning of the episode of overhearing a conversation that Norah had on a beach in Marbella just recently. And so was really, really excited when she said that she would come and talk to me. This is a really, really amazing pod. A lot of you know my stories, so a lot of what she spoke about resonated with me. Trigger warning, we are going to be speaking about domestic violence in this episode and how you come through it. But it's really special. She is very special. She is amazing what she does for women. And I have such admiration for this lady. I'm really excited for you to hear it. So welcome to this week's episode of BeBelle. I am delighted. I actually bumped into this lady in a gorgeous hotel in Marbella a few weeks ago, and I'm just so happy that we continue our conversation today. So I wanted to introduce you to the amazing Norah Casey.
Thank you so much for having me. I thought you were going to tell them we met on the way to the loo, but let's stay classy.
Absolutely. My husband actually said, "You're so classy, Sean." I said, well, I had to say hello because, in fact, we were supposed to do an event together last year and then you got the COVID.
Serendipity.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we were both so lucky to be staying at a gorgeous hotel.
Yeah.
And I really needed that break, actually. It was lovely. And I don't know if I don't think I told you on the day, I was actually sunbathing on my front and I'd done the back of my bikini top. So I was couldn't really move sort of thing. And I suddenly heard two women standing to the side of me on my lovely bed and they were having a lovely, lovely conversation. And I was like, I think I recognise that voice. And I did up my back and I turned around and it was you. And a woman had stopped for a chat with you and it was just a really lovely conversation and you were very kind to this lady. And I was just like, what a lovely, receptive person. I think she was a widow and you were having just the most beautiful conversation. And I was like, I really want to speak to that woman more. It just, you have a good heart.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I hate when I have something in common with somebody like that, but I love it too because, I will be in Arnott's and some woman will come over and give me a big hug and say, you were speaking for me and, I lost my husband. And some of them, they've lost their husband 20 years ago, but it feels like yesterday. Others, I suppose, 4 or 5 years ago. And, they seem to have the capacity to move on a bit and to be able to talk about it better,
Yeah.
But it's not a nice club to be in, I don't think,
No, and grief is such a weird thing because it's always with us.
Yeah. With us, in Ireland, we grow up with the concept of grief. And my mother's from Leitrim, so, there was always wakes and, the body was laid out in the house. So I was used to touching corpses from a young age, but I also was a nurse. So, at 17, you're dressing a dead body, it's the most respectful thing you can do for somebody really when all else is gone, for them, for their relatives,
Yeah. And so you always had that care, that empathetic care in you. And obviously, I've listened to other podcasts of yours and that thing about, I think nurses are always nurses. It takes a certain kind of person. I don't believe it's a job. I believe it's a vocation. I have good friends that are nurses. They're just different.
Yeah, they are all different. And, I'm not sure. Sometimes when you say vocation, it implies you don't need money, And I used to say I was paid for 5 years in, job satisfaction, but I never paid the bills and the mortgage and the rent. And I had a huge debt when I left nursing. But I agree with you. I think, firstly, it is the best foundation for life. And I should never see nurse education as being a foundation for life. But at 17, you're honing these intuitive skills that have stood with me all the way through my life. The ability to go into a ward and know who's in pain, somebody who needs for you to sit down and spend a little bit longer with them, somebody who wants a cup of tea. You just have this ability to connect with people, not always through voice, but just through that intuition. But it also gives you the ability, I think, to communicate verbally, because there's nothing like telling people bad news or, trying to talk to somebody who's very anxious before they're going for a major operation. And so journalism coming so soon after nursing obviously made me a great wordsmith and wrestling words into, some kind of space where people can understand what you mean. I mean, they're so frustrating sometimes. I can sweat over that computer all day, and I write probably 20,000 words a week at least, you know. And I went on to do, I did TV studio production and direction at Ealing College for 2 years, and I did my radio at the BBC. But to this day, what is the foremost communication skills I learned in nursing, for sure.
That's mad.
Yeah.
I didn't realise you were at Ealing. At the end of the 65 bus route.
Exactly.
I grew up in Richmond.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
when I was growing up, we'd start, so the end of the 65.
So that's very good. I did my journalism in Harlow.
Amazing.
Which is Harlow College now. So I was doing postgrad. So by then I'd done my general nursing for 3 years up in Scotland in the Vale of Leven in Loch Lomond. And I'd done a couple of years doing burns and plastics in Bangor over in Edinburgh. So when I moved into journalism, they did me. It was kind of indentured, you know a journalist that trained under these National Council for the Training of Journalists, because we all had to do shorthand and local government, central government, typing, fast moving stories. And it's a very, very rigorous training program. It lasts 2 years, but you're actually on placements a lot too, so, really good, great foundation.
It must have been just such a huge change, like obviously a huge change. I'm like, you couldn't be too different. So, it's ridiculously different. Like,
I know. My father said you just went from an angel to a Rottweiler. Anyway, he wasn't alive when I became a dragon, so I'm sure he would laugh and turn in his grave. But I think very different. And also, I had achieved not a great status in nursing, but I was about to be a sister in a burns unit down in London. And I was coming down with a friend of mine who was a midwife. And then I, sidetracked off and I just had to go down to the very bottom again. And at 23, I was very old, sorry.
I was going to say.
That's what I wish as I was young. But I was very old to go into the postgrad in journalism. And so there were a lot of kids in there, younger than me. And as my temporary editor kept reminding me, I was nothing but an oily rag on the newsroom floor. And I come from a fine line of nurses. My mum and my aunt that I'm named for, Norah, was a nurse in Sligo, and I have lots of aunts and even uncles who are nurses. So, but the other thing that's a big trait in the Casey family is writing and media. And my brother ran a film company, and my sister's a journalist. So we're all really good writers. And I don't think it came naturally to me for some time because my editor was a big, tall, gangly bunch of nerves and anxiety, and he would come and rip the copy out of the electronic typewriter as it was at the time, and he would say, "Norah, was it a dark and stormy night? Because that's what this reads like. It's not news copy. Who, what, where, when, how in the first 30 words." So he would annihilate me in front of everybody, rip me apart, rip up that big sheet of paper, and then he'd say, "Write it again first thing in the morning." And I would write it 20,000 times overnight, and I'd come in the morning first thing, probably write it another 10 times, and then the final version would be sitting in the roll, and he'd rip it out. Well, everybody, the whole production unit, all of the editors and copywriters, and he'd say, "Did you just write that now? Because it shows." And I was destroyed. But I'll tell you what, I am a good writer now.
Well, I was going to say.
I'm a very good sub-editor.
And I'd say you're just a little bit resilient.
Well, I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but, the hard knocks of learning how to, I employ a lot of young people over the years, and, the discipline of grammar and writing and syntax is completely lost on this generation, I have my son writing now, and he's a total digital guy. He knows how to speak multiple codes, and he's doing his master's in archaeology. And I said, "Okay, well, if you want to keep traveling with me, and you need to start writing." And I hope he's not listening, but he's much better than me.
Amazing.
When I started first,
Yeah.
And so his grammar's terrible, of course, and I have to take the red pen to it.
Grammarly is my best AI tool on my computer. Completely dyslexic, so always struggled with the written word. However, I'm a visual learner.
Yeah.
I always say to people, if I go on a course, I could teach it forevermore because I see it and it's in me. I'm like a sponge.
Yeah.
But like moving, I suppose, into the journalism, you go to London. Do you live by yourself there?
I stayed in digs in Hammersmith, like most Irish people who arrive in London. And she was a friend of a friend's mother and an older lady. And, the whole of Hammersmith was full of kind of Irish digs. And, she had all kinds of friends in Hammersmith Road, and they used to come in and call in to us. And, but it was really cheap. Sorry, that's
Yes.
it. You know, you're coming off nursing, you have to I had a huge debt. I wasn't paid too much as a postgrad student of journalism, and that was the main benefit of staying in Hammersmith. Yeah, definitely.
And learning so much. Did you have did you know where you wanted, did you know what you wanted the end goal to be at that time?
No, I definitely didn't. In fact, most of my 20s were a bit of a blur because my default position always is work hard and study. There was 8 of us in our house, and I went to a deaf school, which is a socially disadvantaged school. And when I go back there, they have some photos on the wall, and I'm one of them, which is really, really nice. But the kids are phenomenal there. They're hungry. They're great to go and talk to. They're much better than going to private schools. I'm sorry, but they all have they do mini Dragon Den, and they're up in
Amazing.
the Liberty selling soaps, and so a hunger for education is probably what my parents instilled in us. There's a few PhDs in my family, and unlikely as it might seem, growing up in that environment, we've all done really well in life, and I definitely didn't have ambition to be the boss of anything, to be honest. I just had ambition to learn through education,
Okay.
Back then, going to university was, it was not an expectation, it was a privilege,
Yes.
So, and I think both my parents would have instilled in us the idea that education is the most precious thing you can have in your life. So when I think of my 20s, I'm exhausted because not only did I come out of nursing, then went into journalism, and then, of course, continued doing night times at Ealing College and daytimes, and I was working weekends at Sky News, which before it was B Sky B, and I had a radio show on LBC, which was ironically health, because of course I was marrying my nursing with these newfound broadcasting skills, and Liberty Radio, which was started by the woman who inspired Absolutely Fabulous. It was then taken over by Mohammed Fayed, and it turned into something different. But it was a women's feminist sort of radio program. So there wasn't a second in my life that wasn't filled. And when I'd finished that bit, which was probably getting on for 26, and I had risen through the ranks, I eventually married the two, as in I married my nursing, medical and journalism, and started working for a medical nursing publishing company, and edited the only magazine for nurses, and weekly. And my claim to fame was launching evidence-based practice with the British Medical Association, the BMJ, working across 3 different universities in the Cochrane Centre in York, and the University of Oxford and Toronto, the 3 biggest evidence-based centres in the world. That still is my biggest claim to fame, by the way. It took an awful lot of money to produce a small amount of research that meant that that practitioners, particularly doctors and nurses, had to change their practice. But I also then decided that, I should start my MPhil. And I did that at the University of Wales in my own time, and then transferred to a PhD. And then in the meantime, by the time I was 29, I was editorial director of that company, big, huge company with huge stable of magazines, over 150 conferences worldwide, and a big book publishing imprint. So I was a terrible boss. Recently, somebody said, could you nominate your worst boss? I said, it has to be me. Because, when you're really brilliant at doing something, and I was a brilliant writer, news editor, brilliant editorial director, a terrible CEO. I didn't want to do anything to challenge the status quo. I didn't want to make the tough decisions. In fact, I was interfering all of the time with the editorial side, ignoring the sales and the marketing and the production side. So eventually a whole pile of the staff shuffled into my office and said, this production manager had been not turning up and turning up late, and, not doing his work. And they said, we're picking up his work because you will not make the decision to start, the process of him leaving this organisation. You're making us work harder. We're picking up all of the work. So if you don't do anything about it, we're just walking out of here. So I said, don't walk out, I'll do it. And
was that the first time that you've been challenged like that to actually
I thought I was the loveliest, nicest, you just want to be everyone's best friend, And also I had no management theory. I just was good at being really quick and fast, I had read a study at the time that the women who got into the boardrooms of the FTSE 1000, the first ones in the world, the first generation, let's say we're 3rd generation. How did you get there? Number 1 answer, putting my hand up fastest, quickest, getting a reputation for getting the job done and doing it, really well. So that I was the best child in the class. I had my hand up quickest, fastest. Anything you want me to do, I'll just do it and devour it and deliver it back in record time and make it beautiful. It was my homework.
Yes.
So I just said, that's it. And I was lucky that the company sponsored me to do Ashridge Management College.
Okay.
Which is now called something else. I'm trying to think, because I'm a lifelong alumni member. So I did strategic management there for 2 years. Again, it's 3-week placements where you're not allowed out, and then you work live with different companies. And I went back and did advanced strategic management with them, actually, which was a year-long program. So if I've one skill in life, which I would say I have transferred into my personal life, as well as my work life, it's strategy, I mean,
Okay.
I can go into any company and they'll say, you never have come across, the fabric cutters company of the year. And I said, well, it doesn't matter. They're all the same. Show me your business plan, show me your cash flow, show me where you're spending your money on, show me what the pinch points and the pain points are. So strategy is my DNA, just.
Yeah.
And I was.
And solutions from the sounds of it.
Solutions, but also keeping it very dynamic. I'm always saying strategy is a state of mind. It's not a document in a filing cabinet that's gathering dust, It's really constantly looking outside to see where is the world going. I mean, during COVID, I was mentoring women across the world. I work with Vital Voices, so it's set up by Hillary Clinton and the late Madeleine Albright. And I really do economic empowerment, those women.
Yeah.
Most of the organisation is engaged with women in public life and politics. But the women I mentor are, they're substantial companies and businesses in all manners of places, from, Africa to Ethiopia to India and here in Ireland. And, you get this wonderful breadth of feeling about women and what they're going through. But the biggest thing that I can give them is probably that idea of setting a strategy and a goal.
Yeah.
All of our brains need sat-navs, and, once you have one and you start working towards it, it's great. But you also then need to say, they all fell apart when COVID came along, because, you think you've got one template of what life's like and consumers and how they're behaving and your world and how you're trading in that world. And then suddenly, whatever the question was, the answer's digital,
Yeah.
and everybody's trying to deal with the anxiety and the fear and the fact that they don't have teams around them anymore, and they're trying to deal with remote working. So, everything changed. And
do you think, I think as women we're quite flexible. Do you think women coped with that a little bit better than men, or do you think it was just the same across the board?
It's a mixed bag, because, during that period we had the she session, they call it, where loads of women lost their jobs. And that, even though, men probably did do a few more dishes, but the overwhelming amount of home life work rested on women's shoulders, who some of whom had huge jobs, and they were throwing the wash in and trying to get the kids, lunches ready, and homeschooling on occasion. And what were they going to do when they came in from school, and how were they going to cope with bosses who demanded that they were visible on a screen as often as they needed to be, and cooking and doing the shopping and possibly caring for elderly relatives. So, it was a huge burden, I think, on women during that time. And it still is, because, a lot of women in particular have chosen to do hybrid working or home working. And there was a survey out last week about the fact that, they're missing out on opportunities. They're missing out, networking is so important, in the office, but missing out on promotion and missing out on, new jobs and career changes. And that's unfortunately because we have this very strange style of work where if you can't see the person, you think they're not committed. And, when I had Dara first, and I had to go back to work at 12 weeks, and I used to guiltily get up at 5 o'clock to leave, but I might have been the first one in that morning, and I would never allow anyone to interrupt my time. I was so focused on doing my work. I probably did 10 times the work that anyone else did in that office. But still, all my male colleagues would look at their watch. Oh, is it that time already? And it's just skiving off. And, so some of these things have changed because men have started to be able to it's not always their fault. Their bosses don't feel that they should be the ones that are picking up the child.
No, I think that's it. Sometimes they're not asked, and we're blaming them, and sometimes it's the upper people that aren't. But did we learn anything? I struggle at the moment. I feel like we're all working really hard, and I remember during COVID, I was like, well, I'm not going back to that rat race. I've learned now how to look after myself a bit better. I'm going to make sure that I set my boundaries now, and And I am much better at it than I was 4 years ago. However, I feel the pressure.
Yeah.
And a lot of the women that I work with, they've gone right back to it, and they're working probably just as hard or harder than they were before. I don't know if because we kind of stopped and
then, I was amazed. I often said in the early days, it depends on how long this goes on for how much we change as human beings. But maybe it went on that much too long that we were all desperate to get back and be busy bees again.
Jo Brown Ireland offers luxury natural products for both you and your home. They were founded in 2016 with the ethos of developing real premium products in a natural, sustainable way. Their packaging is all bamboo, which is grown naturally. They are very passionate about all the ingredients that they use, to the point of where even they use the plant itself, with the bamboo powder that sit in their body scrub. This actually, on a personal level, is one of my favourites, and also their cleansing balm. They are award-winning, having won 7 Global Beauty Awards. We are super proud to be working with Jo Brown, and thank you for supporting BeBelle podcast.
But I think one thing that it did do, I'm no different to yourself and lots of people listening. You know, I've had challenges in my life, and during my 20s, while I was doing all that manic work, I was with a very violent husband, and I've spoken about that. I hope, I certainly hope not too graphically, but, I tried to temper some of the information around what happened in my marriage based on who's listening.
Yes.
And I don't talk about it very often. But, I did a campaign recently as an ambassador, and it was called The World's Strongest Women. And it was the first time that I kind of realized how strong I was at that time, because I certainly felt weak. I mean, I felt like a doormat. I couldn't really understand. Firstly, I was allowed to work. I didn't have friends. I was far away from home. I was in London. He was 40. I was 23, and there was a huge difference in financial resources. He had the house. He had everything. He had only drove Porsches. That'll tell you what he was like. And he ran a big construction company. And I was almost his Eliza Doolittle, because I was green, gauche, no money, no sophistication. I think the first restaurant I ever went to was with him, and he had to show me how to use the knives and forks. And so he did in many ways shape me in the early days. But it wasn't too long before he was saying, you're my princess, and I want to be I want to be with you for the rest of my life. You're everything I've ever wanted, and I adore you, and you were on a pedestal. And then he would look at me and say, are you going out on that? I think you should change, There was, in the early days, lots of clenching of fist, maybe a little bit squeezing too hard on my arm if I talked to somebody for too long. He was a Freemason, and they had these Freemason dinners where the women were clapped and brought in separately. And, if he left to go to the bar, somebody came over and talked to me one night, and he was really, really upset. That was probably the first time I'd seen real anger, and he grabbed me by the arm, and I had 4 fingerprints on my arm afterwards, and said I was making a show of myself and, belittling myself I was just talking to him. There's nothing more than that. But before we got married, I always think now that if I knew when he slapped me the first time that he was never going to stop, that would have been a life-changing thing for me. I helped to fund 2 interviews with Women's Aid when I spoke about it first, which is for young people to learn if they're in a toxic relationship, because I was so naive. There was no Women's Aid. There was no helpline. There was no ads on the TV. You wouldn't dream of, phoning up somebody and asking for advice. And he had always promised me that he would take me around the world. Not literally. It was just, I suppose it was London to Singapore to, over to Hong Kong, around the other side to Hawaii. I'd never been anywhere. I mean, I was going home on the ferry, so I didn't have money. And he had, at that point, my passport and everything, and he organised the whole thing. And the night before we went to dinner, and we came back, and as we were going up the drive, I said something to upset him, and he slammed his hands on the steering wheel, and he just screeched to a halt, where the stones are sparking. And I thought, oh, wow, gosh, what was that all about? And anyway, he got out of the car, and I thought, maybe I just misunderstood. And he opened the door to, I thought, help me out. But when I got out, he just grabbed the top of my head and bashed it on the top of the Porsche. And I really slammed it hard. I can assure you there is such a thing as cauliflower ear. And it was the way he just so casually, he said, I knew it would take a while to put manners on you. And then he just casually went up and opened the door and went up to bed. And we were flying from Heathrow the next day. And I went in and sat on the couch and I was stunned. Like, how could somebody do that to me? I mean, I don't think I'd ever experienced physical violence in my life. We had a no-smacking childhood.
Yes.
And suddenly this person who loves me has just whacked me across the side of the head. And I was all purple and blue all down the side of my face. And my eye was bloodshot and my ear was stinging and starting to swell. And the longer I sat there, to my shame, I felt, and I still kind of wonder about that person, I started then thinking, what did I say? What did I say to make him behave like that? And what makeup will I wear tomorrow to hide it? And we, in silence, went to Heathrow. We boarded that plane in silence. He always had a thing about us sitting aisle to aisle. And we were an hour in the air, and he reached over and touched the side of my face, which was now mottled, purple, blue, swollen. And he was crying, uncontrollably crying. And he kept saying, I'm so sorry. It's the stress of work, going on holiday. I'll never do that to you again, ever. And I believed him. I believed that somebody who loved me that much to, and it wasn't really about the money. It was, somebody who loved me so much to take me around the world and make sure I experienced things I'd never experienced before, that could never do something to damage me. But in my marriage, which, I was with him quite a long time. We were 9 years in total. And it wasn't too long into my marriage when those kind of coercive, controlling behaviours turned into hitting and slapping. And he did, one particular night, we were at dinner and he drank too much and I wouldn't get into the car with him. So he left in a rage. And by the time I went home, I couldn't get in the door. So I was knocking and knocking and knocking. I had no keys. And when he came out, he just grabbed me by the hair and pulled me in. And he kicked me and battered me across the head. And, I can't, all I feel when I talk about it is he's raining blows down on top of me. And I was on the floor and he went to the kitchen to get this huge knife and I could see him coming towards me. And I just ran to the sitting room and put the couch up against it. And he's screaming, saying, look what you made me do. Look what you made me do to you. You're a disgrace. You're no wife. You just don't know how to behave. And eventually it calmed down, but I couldn't see out of one eye. There was blood coming down the side of my face. I'd broken ribs. And when I woke up at about 3 a.m., he was standing over me with the knife. And I thought, I'm dead. I'm definitely dead. But in fact, he got down on his knees and begged me to forgive him and told me all kinds of things that were going to happen. But I'd heard that now about 20 times at that point. And I suppose then I said, I'm definitely going to have to leave him or he'll kill me. But it took me another 2 years to leave him, Because then it's all about the finances and you've no money. I had nowhere to stay. Somehow I had debt and he had all the money. Nothing's worse than you thinking all the time the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. I don't know. You go into a whole cycle of what happens if I walk out the door, and how much, because the few times I tried, he'd throw all my clothes out. He threatened to kill himself. He would get angry and aggressive and I would run out the door and come back 4 hours later and then he'd cry and say he was going to get treatment, he was going to get help. But when I did leave him, I worked in Harrow. We lived in Wimbledon and every single Monday I drove away, upset I didn't leave him that weekend. Every Friday I went home promising I would. So it was Thursday night and my mum had been over the week before and he slapped me across the face. And she knew he had done that. She was a nurse and she's a counsellor at Childline. And I saw her remonstrating with him out in the car park. And she said to me, I know what he did to you. Tell me what's going on. And I told her, not everything. I told her briefly. She said, if you don't want your two brothers to end up in prison for murder, you better go and tell him and get him out of your life, And I kind of knew then, because I told her. I'd never told anybody.
It's real when you say it.
And you see it from someone else's perspective. If it's all inside your own head, like you just get into the routine of, working really hard, keeping your head down, not walking on eggshells. So Thursday morning at about 5 a.m. I got up and I'd rehearsed a speech a long time. The speech was rehearsed. And And I woke him up. I had just a small bag, and I said, I'm going to leave you. And I was about to go into my speech about, friendship, and how the violence I couldn't tolerate anymore. Firstly, he said, go back to bed. And I was so stupid, you're not leaving me. And I only got to the third sentence when I could hear him snoring gently in the background. So I just went downstairs and got into my little bashed up car, red car. And I felt I was driving off a cliff. Like, I can't describe the butterflies in my stomach, the anxiety. I just didn't know where I was sleeping that night. I still had to go to work. None of my bosses knew anything about what was going on in my home life. And I'm driving away, and, there was a sense of freedom too, definitely, but abject fear. And I just had that mantra in my head, nobody's going to own me financially again. Like, it was, no, not nobody's going to beat the hell out of me again, but it was because what in the end really trapped me was that I had no money. And, if I hadn't left him, somebody asked me what was the most important day of your life. And of course they expected me to say, buying my businesses, getting married to Richard, having Dara, because he came after a lot of IVF. But it was that day, because without having the courage to walk out, and I was homeless for sofa surfing for a long time, and before I got settled. But I'd never have met Richard. So when you get a really shit one, excuse the French, you get a really good one. So he was amazing. And I'd never met him. I would never put myself out there to meet somebody else. He worked for the BBC for 20 years. So we knew each other really, really well. We were good friends, and that developed into something over the course of a year. And I'd never have had Dara, but I'd never have done anything I've done. Like, anybody who starts off as a nurse doesn't set off to make millions.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't my thing in life. I never saw the value of millions, but I did feel, if I'm true to myself about nobody owning me financially, I just have to do it myself.
And can I ask you, when you left and you said like no one knew, did you then find out that they did know?
His friends knew.
Yeah.
They witnessed him, but they were all male, and, his friends. And, although they were like, oh yeah, we have some sympathies, but suck it up kind of thing, there was no sense. I didn't really have girlfriends at the time. Yeah. And I was so long away from home. I mean, 17 to all the way through to 30. That's what they do,
isn't it? I mean, I was in a similar situation, but for a much shorter period of time, and things like he burnt my Filofax.
Yeah.
So I had no contact with anybody.
Yeah.
But when that was over, I just found out that I thought I was keeping this really great secret, but people knew. And
no, none of my family knew. My father adored him, thought he was the best thing. I would only arrive in Ireland and he would have sent it a showy bunch of flowers. For Christmas, there wouldn't be just one present, there'd be 16 of them hidden all over the house. He'd get all my family involved in how he wanted to, so to my family, he was just an amazing person who showered me with gifts and was always on best behaviour, I'd say they saw the anger in him sometimes, definitely.
And then did they see the difference in you when you then were with Richard?
Oh yeah. Look, I didn't know what love was until I met Richard, but I was not a confident person in my 20s. I was out there working as hard as I could to switch my brain off from everything else that was going on. I was definitely not confident after I left him. I mean, I spent the first 2 years wondering if he was going to show up, and we had to have a few meetings before we extricated ourselves. I didn't really want anything from that marriage, by the way. And I started from the bottom again. So I was very focused on work, but not focused on personal life. And having Richard in my life was just, I don't know, you start off at 17 dating and you have no idea what a relationship should be. And then you meet the man who should be, who is the love of your life, but should be with you from the beginning. And all you can think of is, wow, this feels incredible that another person in the world is looking out for you and loving you and respecting you. And I'd never have had a child with Peter, but, with Richard, we couldn't wait. And of course, then had 3 years of IVF. But I think the one thing I found out from that very dark period is I am more resilient now because of it. And that's not to say that every storm that has come along has been easy to weather. It certainly has, especially the death of Richard. And my sister died a few months before Richard. So it was just the annus horribilis of my family. And he died so quickly and so suddenly at 48. So it was quite traumatic for me and Dara. Well, what I did realise is that my default position still is the same. I work really, really hard. But I'm also brave enough to change what I do. And so all of that has taken us full circle around to the question you asked me about COVID. Because what I did find with some of my closest friends and colleagues is that they changed what they wanted to do. The break may not have said slow down. I don't ever slow down. I don't even know the meaning of the word.
I love being busy.
Yeah. Plenty of people out there who aren't busy for all kinds of reasons. So I love being busy. And but I do think that the most important thing that I've done is that I've had the courage at times to say, this isn't working for me. You know, I sold my business to an American company and that was like my baby. Yeah. But it was the right thing to do. I now work in film in London with Film Soho, and I still have Woman's Away, which is amazing. My sister Chris is the editor. But I'm brave enough now to say each chapter is different and there's always going to be, like, I mean, what's life about really? It's about, you know, if you want to, I chose to live it full on and not to dwell on it, you know, and that is a really responsible choice because it means, you know, means movement and acceptance, and it means learning and thinking and feeling and love and hurting and failing and successes, and all those things mean that you just have to get yourself through them and gather that resilience as you go along. And, you know, it's not a great thing to say bad experiences are good for you, but they are. You know, the teacher who tells you you'll never amount to anything is the most motivation you'll ever have in your life. We are, you know, we have to go through, we don't have to, but we go through certain things which makes us, but you give so much back. You know, you're always paying it forward. You're such a role model for that. Thank you. Well, it's amazing. And actually, I was listening to a podcast that you did with somebody else this morning as I was driving up to Dublin. And I don't know, I was feeling a little bit emotional this morning, but you were talking about when you met the Dalai Lama, and I was just in tears in the car because I could just, you spoke about it so beautifully. I could feel what you were feeling. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's from that first day that I was lying on that sunbed and I was listening to you and that beautiful conversation and how kind you were with that lady. And then I heard you speaking this morning on this podcast and I was like, she just is a good egg. Thank you. She has a good soul. I think I'm a perfect nurse, entrepreneur hybrid. and mostly, you know, I give back because I have no use for money. That's the truth. There's only me and Dara. We live in a 2-bed house. I drive a Toyota, which is lovely, but I don't have a huge amount of hobbies and I work all the time. So, you know, I mean, I got a chance to do travel writing and stay at beautiful hotels where we met. Yeah. So that really is my little pleasure and my little time out from life sometimes. But mostly in the early days, I used to scatter everything all over the place. And then I focused my mind into where the places that I can most make an impact. So, you know, obviously domestic violence is a big area for me. The hospice because of Richard's death, which was very beautiful. And I'm forever grateful to them for that. Cancer, you know, it runs in my family. And, you know, my sister is just over breast cancer and everything. And because of Richard. So I kind of pick and choose things that I can add value to. And sometimes, to be honest, the most precious thing I can give anyone is my time. Yeah. You know, I mean, money is much easier to give, you know, but when I can give people time to, you know, MC their events or, you know, talk to their team or, you know, work with somebody who needs a little bit of extra help, like Vital Voices is all pro bono. And during COVID, I went through months and months and months where I was working nearly full time for them to help those women out of, but, you know, they're incredible women and they, you know, my brother's always saying, did you get paid anything this week? I said, no. But, you know, the joy I got where a woman, I was worried she's half Ethiopian, half French. Ida's her name. I wanted to say hi. She wasn't confident at all when I met her. I remember filming her over and over and over again, and she was getting better and better at talking to camera. And then she did a TED Talk and running European conferences. And like the woman is amazing, and she's totally transformed her business. She's a lobby group in Brussels. My job here now is done. Thank you. But no, you. Thank you so much. We talked about time. Thank you for giving me your time. We all need a bit of Norah Casey in our life. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jen. Thank you so much. Thank you. So thank you for listening to this week's BeBelle podcast. Don't forget, you can find us on social media. If you've got any questions, then please don't hesitate to DM us at BeBelle_wellness. You can also find this
on our YouTube channel, which is my YouTube channel, Sian Horn. And don't forget, the more people that subscribe, the better that we can make this pod. So don't forget, like and subscribe across all channels. And thank you.